Good morning, Washington, and good afternoon, Kyiv, and to everyone beyond and in between. My name is Carl Bildt. I was Prime Minister of Sweden once upon a time. I'm now co-chair of the European Council on Foreign Relations, and my privilege today is to introduce and to moderate today's event. What should Biden do about Ukraine? We will discuss a paper that's been issued by the Atlantic Council as we speak, called Biden and Ukraine, a strategy for the new administration. The next few years will be an opportunity to put things right. It's been somewhat bumpy years, to put it in the mildest possible terms, for the relationship between Ukraine and Washington. But now there's a possibility of a new start, and that is very much needed, because where Ukraine goes has, of course, fundamental importance for the security of all of Europe. But before we get started, I would be remiss if I did not acknowledge all of the authors that have made their contribution to the report that we will be discussing today. Dr. Anders Åslund is a senior fellow at the Atlantic Council's Eurasia Center. Ambassador Dan Fried, who is a distinguished fellow at the Atlantic Council and, of course, a former Assistant Secretary of State for Europe and Eurasian Affairs at the State Department. Belinda Herring, Deputy Director at the Atlantic Council's Eurasia Center. Ambassador John Herbst, Director of the Atlantic Council Eurasia Center, and of course a former US Ambassador to Ukraine. Ambassador William Taylor, Vice President of the US Institute for Peace, and a former US Ambassador to Ukraine as well. And Ambassador Alexander Verkhovna, who is a distinguished fellow at Atlantic Council, and the former Ambassador to Russia, NATO, and a number of other things. I do hope that this will be a paper that will inspire US policy in the years ahead. And let me just, before we go further, say that there's a link to the paper at the Zoom chat and also at the Atlantic Council website. And let me also add that for this, the Atlantic Council is partnering with the extremely good team of the Viktor Pinchuk Foundation and the Yalta European Strategy. I happen to be on the board of that one in Kyiv, in order to make this happen. But let's go ahead. We are joined here by Ambassador John Herbst, one of the authors of it, who will outline the key findings. Representative Marcy Kaptur of Ohio and Brian Fitzpatrick of Pennsylvania, they are co-chairs of the Congressional Ukraine Caucus. Ruslan Stefanchuk, who's first deputy chairman of the Rada, the Parliament of Ukraine. Yulia Sviridenko, who is deputy head of the Office of the President in the government of Ukraine. And Celeste Wallander, President and CEO of the US-Russia Foundation. And by that, I think we would like to hear from Ambassador Herbst, presenting the key findings of the report before we go into reactions to it, moderated discussion, and then also Q&A before we end up. John, the floor is yours.
Carl, thank you very much, and thank you to the Viktor Pinchuk Foundation for doing this event with us. Carl mentioned the most important things right off. This is a paper produced by an outstanding network of people who know a great deal about security in Ukraine, American interests in Europe. And that the key reason this report is necessary is to put back on the right footing the very important US-Ukraine relationship, which was thrown out of kilter during the Trump years. The single most important recommendation we have is for President Biden to reach out to President Zelenskyy. It's about time for the first phone call between the two presidents to be followed by a meeting between the two presidents to establish or to reestablish a relationship of trust between the President of the United States and the President of Ukraine. But beyond that, that will enable the pushing forward of a very important agenda for the United States and for Ukraine, starting with securing Ukraine's position in the East against the Russian war in Donbas and the Russian occupation of Crimea. So what are our recommendations? We should appoint an ambassador immediately, a very senior ambassador who has access to President Biden. We should take an active role in Donbas diplomacy because the Minsk process has been frozen. The only serious negotiations have taken place between American diplomats and Russians when Tori Nuland was the assistant secretary under Obama and when Kurt Volker was a special envoy under Trump. We should increase American military assistance to Ukraine and increase sanctions on Moscow to increase the pain from Moscow of its aggression. But the sanctions should include conditional sanctions, which would go up if Moscow's war continues in Donbas. But they also should be sanctions which come off once Moscow ceases its aggression in Donbas. We should enhance security in the Southeast Europe and the Black Sea, comparable to the steps taken in the Baltic area. We should deepen Ukraine's integration in NATO through a variety of steps and ensure that Ukraine is doing what's necessary to eventually become a member of NATO. And we should maintain attention to and support for Ukraine's sovereignty in Crimea, Ukraine's territorial integrity, including supporting the Crimean platform. Okay, but the security side is only part of the agenda, perhaps the most important, but not the only important part. There's also the question of domestic reform in Ukraine. We should empower a senior US official, as point person for reform. We should prioritize the establishment of independent courts. We should take action against major corrupt figures that are undermining reform. And I'm happy to say that today the US government took our advice as they sanctioned Igor Kolomoisky. We should press for reform of the Prosecutor General's office in Ukraine, work to re-empower the National Anti-Corruption Bureau of Ukraine. We should also work to ensure the complete liberalization of the energy markets in Ukraine, where there's already been great progress. We should help establish full transparency in ultimate beneficiary owners of major media in Ukraine. And we have to congratulate the steps taken by President Zelenskyy against Viktor Medvedchuk's control over Ukrainian TV channels. We should champion anti-monopoly legislation and promote the independence of the National Bank of Ukraine. I only had 3 minutes, so I think my time is up. I'll be happy to discuss this further during the moderated conversation. Thank you all.
Thank you very much. And for reaction to this initial one, I would like to welcome Representative Marcy Kaptur of Ohio. She read the report, I understand. We'll offer her thoughts on how Congress can make its contribution to help shape and implement the issues that are there. I understand that Representative Brian Fitzpatrick will be joining us live somewhat later to also keep us up to speed on the Congress roles. Representative, you have the floor. And if she hasn't joined yet, she hasn't, we can't hear her, no. Could we then just skip, Ruslan Stefanchuk from Kyiv, if I could ask you to step in first then.
The Atlantic Council analyzing report Biden and Ukraine, a strategy for, just a minute, the Atlantic Council's analytical report Biden and Ukraine, a strategy for a new administration, has been issued very timely because the period of discussion for us with whom and where to go is over. We must move forward and take concrete steps. The reports provide a balanced description for the current situation in the context of Russian aggression against Ukraine and provide specific recommendations. Now, when these reports have been published, I am taking responsibly bringing its contents in the attention of President Zelenskyy. You have already had the opportunity to make sure that our president is ready to take decisive steps. If the administration of President of Ukraine and the United States use these reports as a basis for developing joining further action, it will be a guarantee for rapprochement of our countries and the formation of real partnership between us. I'm also confident that the implementation of the proposed recommendation will contribute to Ukrainians' European and Euro-Atlantic integration, as well as the restoration of trust and cooperation with international financial institutions. I see in the report the desire of strong partner to help Ukraine to establish peace in the region, as well as to achieve stability and become the prosperous state. We are also working on these issues and developing our transformation strategy. If everything is done as recommended by partners from the Atlantic Council, I am convinced that Ukraine will not only restore its borders, but also enter the international arena as a powerful players. No one will have the desires to question or test the sovereignty of state of Ukraine and the wellness of the people to live in the free democratic country. Thanks again to all the experts for their hard work and for the opportunity to speak today. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your remarks. And could I ask Yulia Svidorenko perhaps to give her initial reactions to the report as she has seen it?
Yes. Good morning, everyone. Good morning, Washington. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak. It's a privilege to share our administration view with such a distinguished audience. And definitely the United States is Ukraine's main strategic partner and ally. And I'm grateful that the White House team, new team, they underscore it very clearly in private and public communication. So it's essential for us to establish an effective work and to bring strategic significance for both countries. We should send a clear message to the world about the strengths of our partnership. So I think that President Zelenskyy has extended an invitation to President Biden to visit Ukraine. So I think we also would be happy to organize President Zelenskyy visit to the United States. So the territorial integrity of Ukraine, I think, is a vital concern for Europe and the United States. President Joe Biden has said that at the latest Munich conference. So we appreciate this position and we really support it. Action speaks louder than words, and this is the main principle of today's presidential office and today's presidential team. So you probably may mention that National Security Defense Council imposed sanctions against Viktor Medvedchuk, the owner of channel that were engaged in anti-Ukrainian propaganda. So latest, the National Security Defense Council, they imposed sanctions against 10 former officials and that betrayed Ukraine. So I want to assure you that the President Zelenskyy and his administration will continue on the reform path, and they're just a few first action. Yes, we agree that Ukraine must restore control over its international border and make it as soon as possible. And we really highly appreciate your involvement in dealing with regime that violate international law, such as Russia. So it's extremely important for us that United States join the negotiation process on Donbas in the Normandy and in Minsk format to make them as effective as possible. So the United States, the EU, Ukraine should coordinate the approach. We must work together to defend democracy and freedom and to oppose to authoritarian regime. So I think it will help Ukraine tremendously to receive a clear signal from the United States on Ukraine's membership in NATO. We seek to strengthen military cooperation between United States and Ukraine to further increase the cost of any new military aggression. And we have to confront all aspects of a hybrid war together. This includes cyber threats, counter-information attacks, and systemic propaganda. So it would be highly appreciated if the United States consider introduction a new comprehensive sanction regime until the war in Ukraine ends. And this sanction actually must remain in place until Eastern Ukraine and Crimea fully return to Ukraine control. Also, we would be grateful if the new sanction will include Nord Stream 2. So it remains a measure, if not saying that actually it's existential threat to Ukraine national security. And as we discussed, the expectation for the new US administration stopping this pipeline is absolutely critical for us. So this project could seriously damage not only the economy in Ukraine, it can jeopardize energy security in Europe. So we greatly appreciate the strong US opposition to this Russian geopolitical energy project. So and I just have 2 minutes, so we count on US support for large scale and systemic international transformation in Ukraine, initiated by President Zelenskyy. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I'm quite certain we will return to some of those issues in the debate. I understand the Representative Kaptur is now with us, and if that is the case, the floor is certainly yours.
Thank you very much. I am just as co-chair of the Ukraine caucus in the Congress of the United States. I want to send special greetings on behalf of our caucus, a bipartisan caucus of over 50 members now, to all of those who are listening on this call. I know each of you is a liberty lover, and so am I. I know our Canadian brethren here on the North American continent, our friends in Ukraine, and all across the Transatlantic Union. It's just a joy to be with you this morning. I want to thank Ambassador Herbst, Melinda Herring, and their team at the Atlantic Council for their leadership, and I underline leadership, in organizing this important conversation. It's actually fun after the week I've put in. So I'm grateful for the timely launch of this report entitled Biden and Ukraine, a strategy for the new administration, so that we are prepared to set a bold agenda to help the people of Ukraine advance liberty's agenda, so richly deserved in that country. The report is the work of some of our country's most respected and experienced diplomats and scholars, including Ambassador Herbst himself, Ambassador Bill Taylor, Ambassador Sandy Vershbow, Ambassador Dan Fried, Melinda Herring, and Anders Asland. I mean, you're talking about hundreds of years of experience if you add them all up. That's pretty impressive. And after 4 years of what I think I would term turbulent and personality-driven foreign policy here in the United States under the previous administration, I am so grateful for President Biden and Vice President Kamala Harris, Secretary of State Tony Blinken, and I'm confident that their leadership and steadfast support of Ukraine will help us help Ukraine over these coming years. As you well know, Ukraine is the scrimmage line for liberty on the European continent. Tyranny is on prowl. It's on prowl directly with the invasion of Ukraine. It's on prowl on the internet. It's on prowl in the cyber hacking that is done, not just in our country, but in other places as well. So we know that the road to liberty is jagged, but we're all on it. And we're on it together, and that makes a difference. And the Ukrainian people's perseverance gives inspiration to liberty lovers everywhere. Tragically, since the 2014 Maidan revolution, over 14,000 Ukrainians have died at the hands of brutal Russian aggression. And I know millions more have been displaced, and I hold deep concerns with the significant backsliding and reform as we see the oligarch class bite down harder and once again reasserted itself into Ukrainian politics. In March of last year, several members of Ukraine's government and cabinet were dismissed, including key reform-minded ministers and heads of agencies, and many of their replacements lacked the credentials and expertise to lead the reform efforts. More troubling, I observed intensified and targeted political investigations into pro-reform figures and retribution for their efforts to cut off corrupt cash flows to Ukrainian government officials. We have our own problems here in the United States, so we have some parallel experiences in some ways. Key state institutions like the Security Service of Ukraine, the National Anti-Corruption Bureau, and the Specialized Anti-Corruption Prosecutor's Office have come under increasing pressure. And we must be clear. The Zelenskyy administration must recommit to critically needed anti-corruption reforms to make good on the promises the president made to the people of Ukraine. We in the United States must continue to provide tough love to the Ukrainian authorities to show we stand with them in their fight against rapacious oligarchs and the government of Russia that has promoted and continued pressure inside Ukraine. We need more increases in contacts and exchanges between our respective countries, and this includes increasing the capacity of the Rada through increased legislative exchanges through programs like the Open World through the Library of Congress, legislative diplomacy at its highest levels, and we couldn't do more. I know some exchanges are coming this year, and we welcome more. I just want to make everyone on this Zoom aware that this will be occurring. And we must continue to professionalize the Rada by establishing a Rada research service so that members of the parliament can best serve their constituents and make fully informed policy decisions. I know our European allies will help them with that, and to use the rule of law to help lead their country forward. I am very supportive of key reforms that include enhancing inclusivity of Ukraine's agricultural market in a more normal way by lowering financing rates for Ukraine's medium-sized farmers who are actually producing crops, and greatly expanding technical assistance and supplies to the people who are feeding Ukraine right now as it is under duress. And you know who they are? Rural women, largely ignored. Simple technology, simple assistance at the village level, good seed, simple pieces of equipment that they can use, carts to bring in product from the field, wheeled carts. This is not high science, but it is sensible. Gloves where they can work. This is not hard to do, but I would say the West, I give us grade D on really making that happen. Ways to store, ways to dry food. Ukraine's bounty to her own people in the world is extraordinary even now, and we can help more. And I stand ready to help on an international basis in that regard. I think we need to do more to provide educational equipment, simple materials at the village level. Ambassador Herbst, I know, was a leader on that when he was ambassador. I'm getting requests now for whiteboards from teachers in schools that I have visited, and requests to help them begin to assemble libraries with materials written in English, in French, in German. They're very interested in reaching to the outside. And these are simple things that we can do to help and to give hope. So in terms of actions in the Congress, as a senior member of the Appropriations Committee, we have been providing robust support for Ukraine. And I'm pleased to report that in the House, we voted to increase strategic assistance to Ukraine for this year of 2021, which includes $275 million for Ukraine security assistance, which is up $25 million. And we provided $225 million for anti-corruption and development assistance, got an additional $5 million increase. So we need to use those dollars wisely. In terms of reactions to your report and new congressional strategies, in the face of these challenges and opportunities in the 117th Congress, of which I am a member, I believe we need to think boldly and creatively about Ukraine. And your report highlights key challenges that I previously mentioned, but you offer solutions. And thank you for that. A key recommendation is to appoint a capable ambassador to Ukraine as soon as possible. The ambassador must exhibit diplomatic excellence and be a real operator to navigate and achieve wins in Ukraine's murky and often inscrutable power structure. Our country must also be a leader in diplomatic efforts to restore the Donbas and Crimea back to Ukraine. And we need to work with our German and French allies. And no one can afford to any longer sit on the sidelines. And while I appreciate the proposed increase in defense spending up to $500 million, we must also ensure that our defense dollars are spent wisely as we face new budget restraints. And I'm interested in any recommendations from our European colleagues in that regard. Ukraine must reform in its defense sector as well to prevent corruption. And with its robust legacy as a defense supplier, Ukraine has real potential to enhance its own defense with support from the United States and key allies. I will not repeat what others have mentioned about the energy sector, but I'm one of the initiators of the 3 Cs initiative in the House, and we know how vital it is to make sure that Ukraine's full energy potential is met within its borders as well. One area for increased security cooperation is in cyber cooperation, so Ukraine can develop a national artificial intelligence capability to enhance its defense posture. And I must say, I've been working with veterans in the United States who are of Ukrainian heritage, so they speak the language, and we've been focused on veterans, Ukrainian veterans, and we had the first exchange. It was marvelous, with those who, in our country, who work with veterans and have a rich reputation of serving them in dealing with behavioral issues and brain damage, such as PTS. And it was really quite something to be a part of that. So I won't go into any more detail, but I can't agree more with your focus on reforming Ukraine's moribund judiciary, which still bends at the will of oligarchs, not the rule of law. And I wish to thank the Atlantic Council for convening this session and launching this timely report. I look forward to our conversation that will continue, and more importantly, look forward to the opportunity for our Ukraine caucus to work with all of you in the new Biden-Harris administration to implement key reforms on a transatlantic basis. Thank you all.
Thank you,
Representative. Forgot that.
Thank you. A number of very good ideas and also some element of tough love, which I think is necessary. And perhaps we can get somewhat later some reactions from the Kyiv side on some of the aspects of what you said in that particular aspect. But now over to Celeste Wallander from the US-Russia Council.
Great. Thank you very much. Thank you for including me in this terrific event. And thank you to the Atlantic Council for once again leading the way in analyzing and understanding Ukraine and Ukraine's relationship with the United States. And it's an incredibly important issue, and you've kept the focus very strong on this important relationship. I want to just cover, I want to praise the authors and the Atlantic Council for a terrific report. It's so rich, it's so comprehensive, I can't begin to address all of the points. I would endorse the comments that we've already heard in this discussion. I thought I would highlight 3 aspects of context to help drive Ukrainian, especially, understanding of what I think will be the way forward in the Biden-Harris administration's relationship and foreign policy on Ukraine, to assist you in thinking in how most effectively to advance Ukrainian national interests and your relationship with the United States. The first aspect of context I think it's really important to highlight is the Biden-Harris administration's not just return to, but reinvigoration and modernization of the transatlantic partnership and alliance. The importance of not just NATO, but US relations with the European Union, with a host of European institutions, including the OSCE, the Council of Europe, and the bilateral relationships, which are always core to the strength of the transatlantic relationship as well. The US-Ukraine relationship should be, and I believe will be, part of that reinvigorated transatlantic strategy of the Biden administration's foreign policy. Ukraine is a European country. It already is a member of some of the most important and active institutions of that speak to European security and European economic growth and integration. And the agenda of membership in NATO and in the EU helps drive Ukraine, again, more towards the center of that renewed, reinvigorated, and to some extent what I think will be a reinvented transatlantic relationship. So that relationship is a strength for Ukraine in thinking about the relationship with the Biden administration. And a big element of the strength of the transatlantic relationship, which is sometimes overlooked with the focus on NATO, is the centrality of our shared values, of democracy, and the rule of law. And the Biden White House has made very clear that part of that renewed transatlantic aspect of American foreign policy will be a focus on democracy, rule of law, and the attendant fight against corruption and the use of position and privilege to counter trends towards democracy. And in all those respects, I think Ukraine is well positioned to be a strong partner and strategic partner of the United States. The second aspect of context I wanted to highlight is the inescapable issue of Putin's Russia. The report focuses very constructively on a detailed analysis of where Russia's occupation of Crimea and Donbas and its blocking and unconstructive diplomacy in the context of the Normandy format has got us, and lists some very constructive proposals for bringing the United States into the center of that diplomacy. I want to highlight something else about American strategy on Russia that I think is important for the US-Ukraine relationship. And we don't talk about this as much because of the overwhelming reality of Russia's assault on Ukrainian security and its occupation of Ukrainian territory. And that is the Russia challenge for the United States in 2021 goes far beyond the core issue of European security and territorial integrity of Ukraine and its right to choose. Because the Russia challenge and even now threat to American national security cuts to the core of not just our alliances and our partnerships in Europe, but to American security itself. With the intervention in interference in the 2016 election, starting with that, up until through the development of Russian military doctrine that creates enormously dangerous elements for American security and has risked the strategic stability on which American security depends globally, to the recent multidimensional intrusion, a cyber intrusion that is called the SolarWinds intrusion as a shorthand, but involves not just espionage, but commercial espionage, the planting of capabilities in commercial private networks and US government networks that could be used, and hopefully never will be because we will be able to root them out and defend against them and eliminate them. But the intent of the Russian leadership to strike beyond anything that it has done before to threaten American security and American interests is going to be an overwhelming reality of a Biden-Harris policy on Russia. So as our Ukrainian friends and partners think about how the bilateral relationship can support not just Ukrainian national interests, but American national interests for the strongest possible partnership, I would urge you to think also about the fact that the Russia challenge for the United States absolutely is centered in European security, but now it goes to our own security and our homeland security. The third element of context I just want to highlight, and I will do so quickly because others have spoken to it, that I think the report does so well, is to highlight the importance of a positive agenda in the US-Ukrainian bilateral relationship based upon Ukraine's modernization in the economic, political, and social spheres, rooting out corruption, basing Ukrainian politics on democracy, transparency, accountability, and the rule of law, and moving even further towards market economic principles and practices is going to be something that the Biden administration looks for a positive agenda in the partnership and in integrating Ukraine, both in Europe and globally. And I would just close with the observation that I think the designation of Mr. Kolomoisky today by the State Department is a clear signal from the Biden administration about the centrality of this positive agenda of Ukraine moving forward in ending its Soviet legacy of problematic governance and the undue influence of influential economic forces, many of them tied back to Moscow, and should be taken very seriously and welcomed by the Zelenskyy government and all of Ukraine. Thanks again for including me in this wonderful discussion, and I look forward to listening to the rest of you talk as well.
Thank you, Celeste. You indicated some of the issues that are going to be high up on the agenda. I mean, we've seen on cyber, we've seen Russian cyber operations against Ukraine have been damaging for Ukraine, but we also saw them a couple of years ago having the global ramification with sort of spillover effects and all of that. So that's a concern. You also indicated that when we listen to the Biden administration, they put a lot of emphasis now on fighting corruption, illicit money flow, those sorts of things. That is highly welcome. And I think it would be interesting to have reaction from our friends in Kyiv to what's been said in that particular respect, and the sort of the tough love messages that were coming also from the representative on what needs to be done there on the judiciary, the rule of law, the anti-corruption, those issues where things have been going in a positive direction, as to be said, but it's fairly obvious that more needs to be done. Ruslan or Julia, I don't know whom of you. Let's start with Julia and see what reactions you have from the office of the president.
Thank you. So I think that I can tell you that Ukraine should continue on structural reforms, and we absolutely think that our relations, with our partners also related with the structural reforms, and we as a country need the structural reforms. So we continue to work on necessity of a legislated policy such as energy market, land market reforms. We absolutely agree that we need to move forward and to work on independency of the National Bank, to continuous reforms in anti-monopoly committee, to know actually we just for this time we achieved and maintain economic stability, but I absolutely agree with your previous speaker that we need to move further. We need, it's not, we should show that it's not only narrative about reform, that we have context and we move. So I absolutely agree, and I said that, we are, as you know, that we are hoping to sign on our SLA with IMF. It's crucially important for us. Our international partner relations with them is also crucially important for us. So we think that we should sign it shortly. So absolutely agree with all previous speakers. And we just want to say that it's not just about words, about actions. And Mr. President, Mr. Zelenskyy showed by his actions through this National Security Defense Council decisions. So I think that in the next few months, we also can show you good results in all this reform that I just mentioned before. Gas market, electricity market, anti-monopoly, judicial reform, and reform with related to a national regulator to make them more independent and to give them tools to regulate the market in a proper way. So I think that I will give words to Ruslan Stefanchuk. Maybe he will add something from the Verkhovna Rada side.
Quite. Could we turn that over to the Rada? And just you mentioned IMF agreement. That is very important for credibility for markets and for everyone who's looking at the Ukraine economy. And that has been somewhat delayed. So I hope that you are right in saying that it could be signed shortly. But Ruslan, from the point of view of the Rada, where do you see these issues and the possibilities going forward?
Вельмишановні колеги, так, абсолютно я.
Dear colleagues, I absolutely agree that the President of Ukraine, Volodymyr Zelenskyy, and the Parliament of Ukraine and the Cabinet of Ministers demonstrate their commitment to the reforms and to the transformation of Ukraine vis-a-vis their relationship with the US, the European Union. And you know that the Parliament of Ukraine will always make sure that the bills and the draft laws are going smoothly through the Parliament if they are drafted and prepared. I would like to emphasize this because we clearly understand all the threats and dangers in the realm of our relationships, and they have several components to it. And we have to make sure that we introduce proper reforms to protect ourselves. Of course, some of the reforms, they become much of a acute issue, for example, in terms of reform of legislation. This is one of them. But I would like to emphasize that the President of Ukraine, in the view of the 30th anniversary of independence, he initiated a number of discussions that would put the foundation for the new reforms in different areas, and they will be implemented through the Parliament of Ukraine. For the first time this year, we have put together the plan for our legislative work, and we have put on that list all the draft legislation which are already in the House or the ones that are being developed, including the judicial reform. This is the question number one, because fair justice without fair constitutional jurisdictions, we will not be able, obviously, to function in any respect as a country. So it is extremely important to have your assistance vis-a-vis obtaining the information about the international experience and the recommendations that could fit Ukrainian reality. You know that the President of Ukraine has submitted a number of important draft legislations. As of now, they are not complete enough to sort out all the questions in the judicial reform area, but this will be a significant push. So on behalf of the Parliament, I would like to say that we are ready to accept all sorts of initiatives and also turn them into proper pieces of legislation.
Thank you. I don't know if we have Representative Fitzpatrick on the line. He was delayed, was possibly go to your, sorry?
I'm here, sir.
You are there. Excellent. Most welcome. Then your reactions to the report.
Thank you, Mr. Prime Minister. Well, I appreciate you guys inviting me on. First, I want to just say to the Atlantic Council, thanks for inviting me, and to all who put the strategy paper together. With any new administration, it's imperative that we reinforce a relationship of trust between nations, especially with our great ally in Ukraine. As many of you know, before my time in Congress, I was stationed as an FBI agent in Ukraine. That was under the Poroshenko administration. Viktor Shokin was the prosecutor general at the time. We obviously had our challenges in working with the PG's office at that time, but we were setting up the NABU, the National Anti-Corruption Bureau. One of my roles was to train new investigators and prosecutors on what the FBI did as far as investigating corruption. But I greatly appreciated my time. It's one of the reasons why I have such a great connection with Ukraine. Living there, having the opportunity to experience their people, their culture firsthand. I see my co-chair of the Ukraine caucus on, my friend Marcy Kaptur. And I'm also a member of the House Foreign Affairs Committee and a commissioner on the Helsinki Commission. And Ukraine is very, very important to me. It's very important to Marcy. And I think you all have two very, very good allies inside of the U.S. Congress, helping to make sure that we maintain those strong relations. I did meet with President Biden yesterday as well, which I can get into in the Q&A. Last week, the Ukraine caucus acknowledged the 7th anniversary of Russian aggression against Ukraine through the illegal occupation of Crimea and the war in Donbas. And for 7 years, the Ukrainian people have endured an attack on their sovereignty and their pursuit of democratic reforms for their own pursuit of freedom. So the U.S. Must and will continue to stand shoulder to shoulder with Ukraine in defending international norms, treaties, and obligations that have been the foundation of international security and cooperation since World War II. We all know the U.S. is a beacon for democracy across the world. Our foreign policy has to reflect that and continue to empower the Ukrainian people as you all seek your own reforms for prosperity, equality, and transparency, a struggle that the United States still goes through every day. Members of Congress from both parties here understand the challenges that Ukraine faces, and we're going to continue to provide that support. So with that, I will yield back. Happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much, and very good to hear that you have the on-the-ground experience of Ukraine, so you know how lovely but complicated place it really is.
Yes.
Yeah. Time is running very fast, and unless there are any comments coming from our panelists, I would suggest that we go to some of the things that have been appearing on the Q&A, and starting with from Danila Galperovich, who is part of Voice of America Russian service. What is the reaction of the participants, especially perhaps from the Ukrainian side, to the freshly introduced US sanctions against Mr. Kolomoisky? What effect do you think they will have? Ruslan or Julia, I guess. But also welcome other comments on that, because that's the issue of the day, obviously. Sorry, Ruslan.
Dear colleagues, just an hour ago we received information about the introduction of sanctions against Mr. Kolomoisky. I would like to confirm that the President Zelenskyy policy is about the equality of everyone in front of the law, and there cannot be any people who would be implementing some different rules for the country that would be different from the legislation of Ukraine. And I think you have noticed what he did when there was the sanctions against Alexander Dubinsky, how he responded, and his response to the sanctions against one of the oligarchs, Medvedchuk, and the member of the parliament, Kozak, who is related to him. And I think this will be the new approach to any oligarch, no matter what the surname is, because what our president is demonstrating now is bringing back the trust of Ukrainians to the state, to the public institutions, and the trust to the legal system of Ukraine, which is extremely important. I think these are the underlying principles of the presidential actions, and he's demonstrating this by his decisions. Thank you.
Thank you. Another question from Paul Carter. Some people argue that sanctions against individuals and against Russia, sanctions done by the US and by EU have not been particularly effective in changing Kremlin behavior. Perhaps Jon Herbst could say something about that, because you have evidently been thinking quite a lot about the sanctions policy and the effect or non-effect of it.
Sanctions have not persuaded Moscow to give up its seizure of Crimea or to stop its covert or not so covert war in Donbas. That's true. But it's also true that sanctions have perhaps deterred Moscow from additional aggression. We know from the IMF a few years ago that sanctions are costing the Russian GNP approximately 1 to 1.5% of growth per year. Lydia Shevtsova recently put out statistics suggesting that it might have cost Russia cumulatively over the last 7 years $180 billion. So we know that they are weakening Moscow's economic potential and its potential therefore to project military force. We also know that the cronies around Putin and senior officials do not like being sanctioned. While they pursue an anti-Western policy, they have they have palaces in the West or fancy townhouses in Londongrad, so to speak. And they like to send their children to school in the West and to keep their money in the West. So sanctions are an effective tool at limiting Kremlin aggression and imposing a cost.
Thank you. Another question, Roger Higginson, on the question of Donbas, the civilian population. He's saying that they're often Russian speakers, which is true. And the question is, what more can be done in order to perhaps to reach out to them in different ways and attract in order to perhaps change the political dynamics of the occupied parts of Ukraine? Anyone? I throw that question to Celeste, who have been thinking about those issues, I'm quite certain of.
Well, I know that the government of Ukraine has sought to implement outreach programs, and should should continue to do so. And I would defer to our friends from the Ukrainian government to elaborate, but I think that we should recognize that the ability of Ukraine to do that is tightly constrained by the fact that Russia continues to occupy those territories and they remain a conflict zone. So the onus is on Russia to live up to the rules of international law, humanitarian standards, and cease not just its occupation, but the prosecution of conflict conditions that make it so difficult for citizens of that region to be able to see their family in other parts of Ukraine, and for the government to provide those kinds of services. The OSCE has done what it could to monitor and try to create conditions, permissive conditions, but in the end, the real target of the pressure on this and the demands on this needs to be the government of Russia, I believe.
Thank you. Then I got a question coming in here from a person called Marcy Masikas, who also happens to be the EU ambassador in Kyiv, as a matter of fact. And he's asking, what, if any, cooperation with the European Union in Ukraine do you foresee for the Biden administration? I think that probably goes to John as well, or Celeste perhaps. But start with John on that one.
Thank you. It's a very good question. Celeste already highlighted the very important part of the Biden foreign policy, which is to reach out to Europe, which includes not just NATO, but also the EU. I think we've seen with the sanctions on Navalny that there was a serious effort by Washington to coordinate with Brussels. And I don't have any doubt that we'll see much greater coordination between the US and the EU on policy towards Ukraine as regards sanctions on Russia, but also on reform in Ukraine. What you need to see is the staffing up of the Biden team. I think once Tory Newland is confirmed as the Undersecretary of State, there'll be serious reach out. And once you have an Assistant Secretary of State for Europe, you'll see serious reach out to the EU.
Thank you. I can, of course, add that the President of the European Council, Michel, spent, I think, 2 days in Kyiv just a couple of days ago and had, what I understand, were very successful talks with President Zelenskyy. And I'm quite certain there is a close coordination with the White House on these particular issues. Perhaps one, as we are running out of time, there's several who brings up the Nord Stream question, Nord Stream 2 questions, and just an assessment from anyone, where do you think that question is going, primarily from the US side? I think the Ukrainian view on that is fairly well known. And I give that one to Celeste in that particular case.
Well, I would also defer to John, so I'll just make one quick observation, which is there is strong bipartisan support within the Congress, but I think more broadly in American political leadership of the Democrat Party and the Republican Party, and concern about Nord Stream 2, both in 3 regards that were mentioned: 1, enhancing Russian capabilities and resources; 2, creating vulnerability among our allies. I mean, it's, how can the United States be able to reconcile, Article 5 commitment to Europe when Europe may be engaging in activities that creates vulnerability to the main challenge in Europe through Nord Stream? And then 3rd, the concern is about Ukraine's economic stability and prospects. So obviously Ukraine has to develop a multifaceted economy. It can't only focus on the transit element of its economy, but it's obviously an important resource as Ukraine goes through this transition. So I think there is bipartisan support and attention, but I think it'll be filtered through a cooperative approach with Europe and see if the United States and Europe can come up with a sensible approach on Nord Stream 2 that achieves American objectives in cooperation with Europe, if possible.
I would cede my time to Congresswoman Kaptur and Congressman Fitzpatrick.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ambassador. I would like to say, and I thank my colleague Brian Fitzpatrick for sharing our commitment to preventing the completion of Nord Stream 2, and would just say that I would plead with our European colleagues to look at the long arc of history. And America, the United States of America, back in the 70s, became dependent. And that cost us a very heavy price politically, which we've been digging out of for 4 decades now or more, and to be energy independent as a country and to remain a important power. They go together. Energy independence and the ability to be politically strong are intrinsically linked. And so I wanted to say it would be very useful to have a further conversation on this topic with our European allies. And in addition to that, and this is not related directly to Nord Stream 2, but for Ukraine as a country, by oblast, to think about energy independence at home. Here in our country, 20 years ago, we didn't use corn for fuel. Now, 40% of the corn crop of our country is used for biofuels, and we are now advancing on the new advanced biofuel age. Ukraine has the ability to fuel herself and to do it in a way that is clean and very progressive looking forward from an energy standpoint. There are reserves in Ukraine that have not been developed, and I am looking for ways to cooperate with Ukraine and interests in Ukraine in promoting energy independence internally. And I just wanted to put that on the record at the same time as I am pleading with our European allies to have a working relationship with liberty lovers around the world and the Transatlantic Alliance and discuss the topic of European energy independence as well. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Ambassador.
If I could second that, I agree with everything Marcy said. And we're going to have a big role to play in this, all of us in Congress, especially myself and Bill Keating. I'm the ranking member. He's the chairman of the subcommittee, not just on Europe, but on energy. So Nord Stream 2 is going to be front and center on our agenda. And I know, I know Marcy agrees with me. We want to stay engaged with you and our European allies, especially Ukraine, on energy independence. It is a hugely important topic because it's not limited to energy, as Marcy knows. This is a ripple effect across everything that touches upon democracy.
Thank you very much. And I can testify from what I did in Ukraine previously when I was foreign minister, that energy efficiency and energy independence is a huge issue for the future of the country. And we need to do more in order to help in that particular aspect. Unfortunately, we have run out of time. I think I have an abundance of questions that have come in. We don't have the time for that, but that only illustrates the importance of this particular question. I encourage everyone to read the report, and I thank everyone for your insightful contributions to the debate we've had this morning, afternoon, or whatever it happens to be in your part of the world. Thank you.